Our scripture today comes from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 25, verses 18 to 44. It's a continuation of our last time, which happened to be 3 weeks ago, when we focused on the first half of this chapter, where Abigail's husband Nabal insulted David, and David was on the way to kill him. And so now we have Abigail's response to this. It's on page 460 on your Pew Bibles. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cates of raisins, and 200 cates of pressed figs, and loaded them on her donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert, so that nothing of his was missing, and he has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face on the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, let the blame be put on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is full, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemy he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing that he has promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant." David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "Here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of my master's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 maids, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Dalim. Something I found over and over in watching and playing sports is that there's a huge difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. You find it a lot when one team is really highly rated while another team is a huge underdog. For the highly rated team, there's really no winning. If they win by a lot, they're only doing what they were expected to do. And if they lose, it's a catastrophe. For the underdog, on the other hand, they really have nothing to lose. If they lose, if they play risky and aggressive, knowing that if it doesn't work and they lose, it will have gone exactly as expected. But if they win, then it's a huge victory. That means that the underdog can play to win, while the highly rated team only plays not to lose. If you're playing to win, you're visualizing all the things that could go right. If you're playing aggressively, you're taking chances when necessary to get the right result. If you're playing to lose, though, playing not to lose, you find yourself only visualizing the things that could go wrong. You go to make a pass, but you're hesitating the whole time because you're thinking about what will happen if the ball is stolen. Every small mistake becomes an emergency or a crisis, the one last break before it all falls apart. It's really hard to play this way and actually win. See, in the book of 1 Samuel, Saul has been playing not to lose for about 10 chapters. Saul has been trying to kill David this whole time. For years and years, David's been on the run. Saul has had all the power. And it hasn't just been David, it's been everyone that ever followed David has been on the run. If you show even a glimpse of sympathy for David, there's a decent chance that Saul would have you killed. He was the king, after all, and he darn well was going to show it. You were going to believe that Saul was the king, and if you didn't believe it, you were going to have to fake it. All of this was necessary for Saul because he knew that he really wasn't the legitimate king. He knew that God had chosen someone else. He knew that the kingdom was slipping away from him. He probably knew, deep down, that one day David would be king and would lose his crown. It ate him up inside, and it literally drove him insane. He was visualizing all the things that could go wrong at any moment. So Saul was insecure. He even admitted out loud to everyone in the previous chapter. He told David, "I know that you will become king." See, Saul didn't even really believe that he was meant to be king. So he needed everyone else to tell him that he was king if he was going to keep the throne. He knew the kingdom was slipping through his fingers. So even the smallest problem turned into a crisis. Because every moment, just around the corner, was the crisis that was going to sink him. He lived his entire life at this point on the lookout for the way that God would finally bring about his doom. That meant that he could never relax. Every problem was an emergency. He had threats all around him, and they all needed to be silenced. It's a terrible way to live. And when you're reading the book, you can't help but feel a little bit sorry for Saul. This was very different from David. He was playing to win. Even though Saul sat on the throne, even though Saul commanded the armies and wore the crown, David knew that he was meant to be king someday. He knew that God had promised him the crown. So whatever it looked like, even if there was a really huge crisis, David could be calm. David didn't need to take every opportunity to squash his enemies because he knew that he would have the kingdom whether he killed them or not. In fact, David had the opportunity just in the previous chapter to kill Saul. For the first time, it wasn't Saul that had the upper hand, it was David. He really did have the chance to end all his problems by killing his enemy. But he was so secure in the promise that he would become king that he didn't kill Saul. He knew he was meant to be king, and he wanted to be king without killing his countrymen, even if that would make his life easier for now. So you see that one of the biggest differences between David and Saul is that David felt secure and Saul felt insecure. David knew that he was going to be king no matter what, while Saul knew that the crown was slipping through his fingers. David never saw anything as an emergency, because nothing could really stop him. Saul saw literally everything as an emergency, because any little problem could be the one that really sinks him. David was willing to take risks, even like letting Saul live, because he knew they would pay off. Saul wasn't willing to make any risks at all, because every little mistake could cause him to lose his head. For David, no one was really an enemy, because no one was a threat. David didn't even consider Saul his enemy, even though he was dead set on killing David for years. For Saul, everyone was an enemy, even including his own son, because everyone could be that one person that does the little trick that takes away his kingdom. In my 3 years as a pastor, this is something that really resonates with me, because I found that most of my biggest mistakes have happened really because of my own insecurities. Maybe I pushed too hard on something that I shouldn't have because I think something has to happen now or it'll be a disaster. So then I disregard people's feelings and I just barge through work that has to be done. But then I look back after all is said and done and I wonder why I wasn't in such a rush. Because really no one was on my back to get stuff done quickly. And even if they were, it was going to be fine either way. And I realized that came from my own insecurity. I want to prove to myself that I've done a good job. And I'm going to do it, gosh darn it, whether everybody likes it or not. Or maybe I don't take the time to speak kindly to somebody and instead say something rude. And looking back, I find that comes from my own insecurity too. Maybe I'm afraid I'm not being taken seriously, and so I respond in a way that asserts myself instead of a way that's truly loving. There are all kinds of ways that my own mistakes as a pastor simply come from my own insecurity. My feeling that maybe I'm not cut out for this, or that I'm doomed to failure sooner or later, or that I'm not doing as much as I should. From playing not to lose. All of those insecurities take problems and situations that should be no big deal and make them into emergencies and crises. Because they become threats. They're not opportunities, but emergencies. They become the reason that you were never meant to be a pastor in the first place. Instead, for me, it's been helpful to know the same thing that David knew. The only reason that David was going to become king was because God had chosen him to become king. The only reason that I am a pastor is because God has chosen that I should be a pastor. You know, God may have had reasons to choose David, like maybe he may have had reasons to choose me. But whatever the case, there's no reason to be insecure. God said so is the best and most concrete reason for anything, after all. And acting out of your own insecurities is one of the worst things that you can do. Because when you're facing a problem, you find that you really aren't solving the problem that you think you are. So imagine that you're trying to fix a computer, but you can't figure it out. You get really mad while other people are watching. And really, your frustration isn't because of the computer itself, but over your insecurity that maybe you aren't cut out to fix the computer, or your insecurity that other people might think that you're not smart. And in the end, you find that you do things that aren't really meant to fix the computer, but instead to soothe your own insecurities. You rant about how bad the computer maker is, or you throw out a bunch of technical speak that nobody is meant to understand anyway. Because really, you're not solving the problem of the computer not working, but the problem of people not thinking that you're smart. This makes everything so much more difficult. Because first of all, you've entirely forgotten the problem that you're supposed to be solving. Second, nobody will understand you, even yourself. You'll be doing all these things that would really have nothing to do with fixing the computer, and everyone will just sit around being confused. Third, it makes it practically impossible to show love to other people in this situation, because you'll be driven by irrational anger that even you don't understand. It's why it's so much better to be aware of the things that make you insecure, the things that make you angry, so that when you do know what to do, so then you know what to do when you have the temptation to act out of your insecurities. But then we get to this chapter, and David isn't acting the way he normally does. David is normally so confident and secure. David has been merciful to all of his enemies because he knows deep down that he's going to be king no matter what happens. But in this chapter, he really does seem to act like Saul. He finds somebody who insults him, who doesn't give him his loyalty. And instead of showing him mercy like he had with everyone before him, even Saul, he gets his men together to kill his entire family. This is not the character that David has been so far. So what changed? So then look at right at the beginning of this chapter, verse 1. It says, "Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned him at Ramah." This is a pretty good candidate for what has changed. See, David was already anointed to be king of Israel, but the person that anointed him was Samuel. Samuel was the first one that recognized David as king. In fact, Samuel was one of the only ones that recognized why David was king, which is that God himself had told Samuel to anoint David. Samuel was one of the only ones who recognized that David didn't rebel against Saul, but instead Saul tried to kill him from the beginning. Samuel was David's first and greatest supporter. And David was probably afraid, if Samuel has died, then the proof that he was innocent died with him. If ever there was a reason for insecurity, that's a good one. David has known that most of Israel thinks he's evil this whole time. But maybe for David, it was good enough to know that Samuel, at least, a well-respected prophet, could tell us the real story. Everyone's out to kill him, but at least Samuel has his back. The political situation is rather dangerous for him, but at least Samuel, who had a fair bit of political power, was helping him out. Samuel's death isn't just a throwaway line at the beginning of this story. I think it's actually a really important part of it. David is suddenly acting like Saul because he's suddenly insecure, just like Saul was. And look, I just said the real reason that David was king was because God said so. And that's true, but if you're David, I bet it'd be really hard to believe that every moment of every day. I bet feel really great to know that there was some human out there who had his back. Samuel was a big deal to David. Samuel was the assurance to David that he's not going to be seen as a usurper by everyone. It always helps to have some human out there who has your back, even if you really do believe that God is on your side. So this time, when David hears that someone has slighted him, he doesn't choose mercy. He doesn't recognize that he's going to be king no matter what. Instead, he sees an emergency and a crisis, just like Saul only ever saw emergencies and crises. And David's going to deal with that crisis the simplest and fastest way he knows how, because it's too uncomfortable to deal with these insecurities. So he has his men prepare for massacre. He's about to make a huge mistake, both morally and practically. Because from now on, he will no longer be an innocent man who is being chased around by Saul. He'll be a usurper and a murderer. And the mercy that he has shown thus far will go out the window. Everyone will have real cause to hate him. Worse, he will be exactly as bad as Saul was. And trying to shut everyone up who thought he was a rebel and usurper, David would find that he would become exactly that. And everyone would know it. Insecurities like the ones that David had are a real threat to peace, out in the world and even in our own congregation, because they make communication really difficult, and they raise the temperature of every conversation. They make emergencies out of small problems and crises where there is none. But now his wife Abigail comes in and manages to avoid disaster. In the end, not only does she save her husband and her entire family, but everyone seems really happy with her after all. She manages to talk David down even when David himself probably didn't understand why he was acting the way he was. She was able to make peace when even the calm-headed king was ready to make war. So how did she do that? First, Abigail saves the day by recognizing why David is acting different. Notice the main thrust of what Abigail says to David. She says, David is really meant to be the true king of Israel. The Lord will certainly make my Lord a shore house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound up in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. We've seen that David is probably rather insecure because Samuel is dead. And she probably sees that too. She recognizes that David is behaving differently from normal and recognizes the exact thing to say that will soothe those insecurities. Abigail is a genius, and she does the exact right thing in this situation. She shows a ton of wisdom here. When we're making peace, we often have to do the same thing. You know, sometimes people just act strangely. They're not acting like the person that you know. At that point, it feels totally natural to think, man, they really have changed. They're a totally different person from who I thought they were. But you probably know from your own life that there are just days where you act differently. Maybe you have a headache. Maybe you haven't eaten much, or maybe you haven't slept well. Maybe you're just feeling down or feeling insecure. But if someone sees you on that day, it wouldn't be fair or accurate to say that you're a totally different person from who you thought you were. But if that's true for you, it's going to be true for others too. It makes a ton of sense when someone is acting differently from how you expect to give them the benefit of the doubt, to assume that you probably haven't heard the whole story. At that point, if you want to make peace, the first step is often just to listen to them, to hear their side of things so that you know where they're coming from. And sometimes that won't be very pleasant. Sometimes they're going to come off really angry. Again, it helps to give them the benefit of the doubt that this isn't who they are all the time, that they're not a completely different person from the one you thought you knew. And so don't get offended when you're listening, but instead focus all your attention on answering the question, what's really going on here? I promise you, if you do that, the other person is going to appreciate what you're doing, even if you end up disagreeing. Really listening, focusing on the other person, instead of getting offended, is the best first step forward towards building a bridge. Notice here that Abigail is wise enough to figure out what's going on with David without having him speak to her. This is a special case. If she took time to listen to David, maybe she would end up being dead. Instead, she made an excellent guess. But most of the time when you're talking with someone who's angry, you really do have time to listen and to hear the problem in their own words. And you'll find 9 times out of 10 that you didn't fully understand why they were angry in the first place. But whatever the case, Abigail says just the right thing for the issue that David was facing. If Abigail recognizes that David really will become king, that means that David is not alone, even now that Samuel has died. There's some people out there that believe the truth, that David isn't just a bloodthirsty rebel, but someone who is trying to escape with his life. Second, Abigail makes peace by humbling herself. See, what Abigail could have done is just tell her David off just like her husband did. But see what Abigail says, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." She takes on the full responsibility for what her husband did. Because ultimately, it wasn't going to do any good for anyone if she started playing the blame game, even if she really didn't do anything wrong. If you're in the middle of a conflict, there really is no point in playing the blame game. All that does is make everyone defensive and close-minded. Once you start telling other people what they've done wrong, they're very unlikely to listen to you, especially if they're already angry. Now, it may very well be that they are doing wrong, but that's not the first thing that you talk about. Everyone's stress is probably too high at that moment to talk about who did what wrong. Instead, you talk about what would fix the situation. You work together to figure it out. Then, once the dust is settled and you have time to look back honestly, once you've shown that you're willing to put aside criticism in order to fix the problem, then you can go back and talk about how you would do things differently. Third, Abigail makes peace by being solution-minded. See, both Nabal and David went into this situation full of insecurities. Nabal wanted to prove to himself that he was a big, strong man, while David wanted to prove that he really was going to be king. And the problem with these insecurities is that you forget what's really important. You forget what your goals are, and instead you speak to other people in a way that's meant to cover your insecurities. Maybe you'll get angry at someone and make a scene to make it so that no one recognizes your fears. It's much better to recognize your insecurities, to see how they might affect what you do, and actively work to avoid letting them affect you. Which means that you need to take time, even just 10 seconds in silent prayer, to ask God to give you wisdom and peace. That's hard to do when you're upset, but it's 100% necessary if you're going to work towards solutions instead of pouring fuel on the fire. We can see quite well that Abigail is a very smooth talker, which happens to be a lot of like how David is most of the time. Notice she says, "The lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling." And you recognize what she's doing here, right? She's referencing the time that David defeated Goliath with a sling. There's more than a little bit of flattery in these words, to be sure. Abigail is buttering David up. Desperate times call for desperate measures. But even here, it shows something that is really helpful in times of crisis. It doesn't have to be manipulative. It can be true. All it takes is a little heartfelt gratitude and thanksgiving, even praise, in times of anger and sadness. It can be a huge help when you're telling someone to change course. It's saying, "I know who you are, David, and this isn't it." And it's also saying something else. "David, we all know that you are the rightful king of Israel. In the end, God will have his way. You don't need to take revenge, because God will do it for you. He's done it before with Goliath, and he'll do it again. Only keep your hands clean until God does it." It's remarkably effective in taking David out of attack mode, and it makes him ready to trust God more. And four, finally, David makes peace by being willing to change course. David, at this point, very well could have ignored Abigail, went on and burned their house down. If David were a proud man, unwilling to listen, that's probably what he would have done. And it would have been a colossal mistake. But instead, David turns around and avoids shedding blood. David showed all the same humility that Abigail did, and that's what's necessary to avoid just becoming one more Saul. In fact, in the narrative of 1 Samuel, this creates kind of a turning point. This could have been the point where David falls right into the same trap that Saul did. But notice the author structures his narrative with two stories that are very similar on either side of this one. In chapter 23, David flees away from Saul to meet with the Philistines. He does the exact same thing in chapter 27. He flees from Saul and temporarily joins the Philistines. Then in chapter 24, David spares Saul's life even when he had the chance to kill him. David does the exact same thing in chapter 26. Right smack dab in the middle is this story, which the author wanted to highlight by sticking two really similar stories on either side of this one. In other words, this could have been a turning point for David. He could have departed from the way of peace and sent Israel into chaos. But here he really did choose to be a different kind of king from the one that Saul was. He decided to follow the peaceful path to becoming king over the one that would have made his kingdom the same as all the others. This is a hugely important story in this narrative, a climax in David's development, where the temptation reached its height, but he never gave in. David made an excellent choice here, but even David recognizes that it was Abigail who saved him. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, because you have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. We've seen over the last 6 weeks that the situation which 1 Samuel describes is very similar to our own situation here and now. The Israelites had to choose which king they were going to serve, and it really wasn't as obvious as you might think. Saul might have been doomed, but he seemed to have all the power. He had the armies at his side, he had his throne, he had the royal robe, he wore the crown. By all appearances, Saul was the rightful king, and David was a usurper at best. But God had chosen David to be king because he wanted a different kind of kingdom than what Saul could give. Saul was a king just like the kings of all the other nations, but God wanted a different kind of kingdom. The challenge for the Israelites of the time was to recognize which king God had chosen and to get on board. It was a complicated business. Very few people were going around announcing that you should serve David and not Saul. But each would have to come to that conclusion themselves through what they saw God doing. We are in a very similar situation. Jesus Christ is the king that God has chosen to rule over this world. He was chosen to be a completely different kind of king than the kings that this world has to offer. The kingdom of this world, on the other hand, seems to have all the power. It seems to have all the guns and everything it needs to rule. The kingdom of this world showed its style of rule best when it crucified Jesus, even though he was innocent, because of their own insecurity over their own rule. But Jesus rose from the dead, showing that he had overcome this world and was bringing an entirely new kind of kingdom. In fact, the crucifixion was the place where Jesus showed what it meant to be king of this new kind of kingdom, when he gave himself up in love even for those who hated him, in hopes that he would bring peace between God and humanity, that he would save us from the kingdom of this world and bring us in to the kingdom of the glory of the children of God. The crucifixion was where the world was unmasked for who it really was, but it was also the place where Jesus revealed who he was too. Paul says, Christ Jesus himself is our peace, who has made us all one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, so that he might create in himself one new humanity in the place of two, so making peace, and might reconcile us all to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. See, Jesus has made peace on the cross, both between us down here and between us and God up there. And in doing so, he inaugurated a whole new kind of kingdom, one where we are not driven by insecurity and fear over losing power, but where we are driven by our love for God and love for one another, where we play to win, where you don't play to lose, because there's no fear in love. Because like David, we know that God will win in the end. The truth will prevail, and the love of God conquers all. Because we know that when Jesus made peace with us, he also created a kingdom of peacemakers. He showed us on the cross what it really looks like to be a part of God's kingdom. And he called us to love and holiness, which should never look any different from the cross itself. Peacemaking is not an interesting side project of Christianity, something you can take or leave either way. It's at the center of the gospel. We are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal to this world through us. Be reconciled to God. Leave the doomed kingdom of this world, and not only that kingdom, but all the ways that kingdom does things. And join the kingdom of Jesus Christ, based as it is on the love and peace displayed on the cross. Yes, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God, because there's a clear family resemblance, as they will have done to others just as their Father has done for them. Let's pray. Great God, give us the wisdom to seek your kingdom at work in this world, and inspire us with your own example to love and serve this world as you did, making peace with our lives just as you have made peace with your blood. Amen.